Educators Lead, episode 131.
We need to really think about the here and now, live in the present. What do I need to do today? And if you go ahead and you get your clarity, you get your strategy, you get all that aligned, but you really then take clear action and you don't delay and sit on your hands and wait for the perfect opportunity, then you start to build momentum. And once you have that, then the sky's the limit.
Welcome to Educators Lead, where we interview leaders in education to offer inspiration and practical advice to help launch educators into the next level of leadership. I'm your host, Jay Willis, and I want to thank you for subscribing to our show.
This is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Educators Lead. Let's join my friend Jay Willis and get ready to take your leadership to the next level.
Hello, EduLeaders. Jay Willis here, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Naphtali Hoff. Naphtali, are you ready?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jay.
All right. Naphtali Hoff has served in education as a teacher, associate principal, head of school, and is currently the president and executive coach of Impactful Coaching and Consulting. Naphtali is also the author of Becoming the New Boss, a book set to release in mid-July that builds on his leadership experiences and lessons and seeks to empower new leaders to hit the ground running. Naphtali has also earned 2 master's degrees in both education and educational leadership, as well as a doctorate in human and organizational psychology. So that's just a brief introduction, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, that was a great start. Thank you, Jay. Like I said before, it's a pleasure to be here and be with you and your audience. In essence, I am an educator, first and foremost. Began my career in the classroom and slowly but surely found and pursued opportunities that allowed me to serve as an administrator as well. For about 12 of those years that I was in the classroom, I also held concurrent administrative part-time positions, and then eventually became head of school at an independent school down in Atlanta, Georgia. After that experience, I decided it was time for me to try to shift my focus and my energies and help leaders in particular, educators as well, but really try to be on the helping side from the outside of things. So instead of working in a specific single organization, I wanted to be able to broaden my reach, broaden my impact. And so for the last 4 years, I've been serving as an executive coach and consultant. And so in that work, I've had the opportunity and pleasure to work with countless leaders, teachers, schools, providing coaching, consulting, and then professional development and training services.
Awesome. And I want to jump into the story of your journey a little bit more and kind of dig in to that. But before we jump into that, what would be maybe something interesting about yourself that most people wouldn't know?
I think just the very fact that I went into education to begin with, when I was in high school, dating myself a little bit, but one of the more popular shows on TV at the time was one called LA Law. It glamorized the legal profession, and I certainly had very significant interests in becoming a lawyer. I felt that was where my interests and my abilities lay, and gave that strong consideration. But I went abroad to study for a year after high school in Israel. Became enamored with study and with the ideas of learning and teaching, and over time became more and more interested in the idea of becoming a professional educator. So I went from one area to what I would think to be a very different area, all because I had been inspired by others and really found value in that, and that's really the direction that I've pursued ever since.
Yeah, that's quite a pivot from law school to education.
Yeah. Well, I never actually pursued law.
Okay.
In terms of my education, I just had it in my mind that's where I would go. But nonetheless, it still was a significant pivot in a variety of ways. But I don't have any regrets. I feel that deep down, teaching is what my mission, my calling is. And no matter what I do, whether it's through my coaching, through my writing, through my training, and any other type of opportunity to engage, I try to see myself through the prism and through the lens of being a teacher.
Right. So speaking of writing, you have this new book coming out called Becoming the New Boss, the New Leader's Guide to Sustained Success. So where did the path to that book begin, and what's the book all about?
So I'll start with the second question. The book is really intended to help people who are transitioning into leadership, either literally from a non-leadership position into a conventional leadership position, or somebody who's transitioning upwards within the leadership space, or perhaps across from one organization, one company to another. So it's really intended for people who are looking at leadership through a new lens, if you will, want to get as much information as they can about the steps that they need in order to succeed. And frankly, leadership is a very challenging area. On the one hand, it can be very glamorous. It often comes with a lot of perks, financial and otherwise. On the other hand, it also can be very, very difficult for people to get traction at the beginning, to earn people's trust, to develop the kinds of relationships necessary for people to want to work with them and give them the opportunity to effectualize the change and the other things that leaders need to be doing in order to be successful. So I wrote this book to a large degree, now coming back to your first question, because this is the kind of thing that I wish I would have had when I first got started in school leadership. I felt like I had a mentor, I had people that I was working with, I had my own experiences, but I don't know that I really had a resource that I felt I could turn to that would walk me through really the A to Z of leadership transitions and make sure that that first period in particular, the period by which people typically judge you and sort of decide are they going to get in with you and join your camp and get behind you, or are they not? Are they going to sort of form this form of resistance or apathy, whatever it might look like? That type of guide, that type of manual, that type of sense of, somebody who's walking me through that process and helping me achieve those goals, that was a resource that I didn't have, and that was something I felt like, in retrospect, would have been really helpful to me. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote this with that type of profile in particular in mind. And the process really happened over time. After I transitioned out of school leadership, I began writing regularly for my own personal blog. I also write for nationally and internationally published websites such as Smart Brief, both for leadership and education, as well as Huffington Post. And the posts that I would submit were often leadership specific. And what I started to see is that I was in the process of these various posts touching on a lot of different areas. And so I spent the better part of the last 2 years bringing all that content together, identifying sort of an ebb and a flow. How can I utilize it in a way that people will see, what leadership is and how it is distinguished from management, how leaders can get off on the right foot, how they can manage and move along a change process. All these kinds of things, and yet at the same time how leaders can maintain the kind of work ethic and yet balance that they need so that this can really be a sustainable enterprise. We see how quickly leaders tend to churn out of the field, especially within schools. There's a lot of research, a lot of data that talks about the short-lived nature of school leadership, and I think that's it's a shame. It's a shame for the schools, it's a shame for the leaders, but really it's a shame for the kids, because it's so difficult when a school leader is not there for any extended period of time. So I felt that if I could provide something that would give leaders an opportunity to hit the ground running and yet at the same time have sustained success, sustained both in terms of their relationships with others, but also for their own sense of gratification and purpose and energy, that they could see themselves doing this for a decade or longer, that to me would be a great benefit for the marketplace.
Well, so why do you think there's so much churn as far as leadership positions in schools?
I think it has to do with a variety of factors. Number one, candidate readiness. I think that especially within the public school community, there's a desperation for school leaders, qualified school leaders. There's just a shortage of qualified people, and as a result, some people are brought into leadership without having the necessary training that they need in order to cover all the various pieces. But I think independent of training, and I had 2 master's degrees, and certainly one could say that with my previous experience, I had enough to be able to go into a school and to do everything necessary to succeed. But I had many challenges myself, and I think a lot of that has to do with not having experience, not necessarily having a mentor, not knowing what the challenges are, and not having the runway necessary from the school board, from people on staff, from other members of the constituencies and the communities that allow leaders to get the momentum necessary to have that type of success. They're hit with a lot of issues, oftentimes if they're confronted with failing schools or with core fundamental challenges, and they don't really have the opportunity to get their feet underneath them before they really delve into many of the core issues that they have to address. So I think that it's a matter of training, support, timing, and understanding that this is not going to be, in most cases, a very rapid process. It needs to be nurtured, it needs to be developed, and time and resources need to be invested in order to give a leader the opportunity to succeed. And I think because so many leaders hit this wall so early on, they tend to burn out. And when you factor all those things in play, it's not a recipe for success.
Well, so give us kind of a sneak peek into this book. I mean, if let's say that I'm a first-year principal and I pick up the book, and then, once I've had a chance to read everything in the book and kind of process it, what would you hope, once someone set the book aside and walked away, what would you hope they'd walk away with?
Well, I hope that they would walk away with the fact that, number one, this is very challenging, but at the same time, it's very rewarding, and that if they follow the requisite steps. And I'm not saying that I know all the issues that go into school leadership. I'm not suggesting that my book answers all of their questions, but I do think that it really covers a comprehensive A to Z list of things to consider. And I think that if people were to look at the book, read it, the beauty of it is that because it's divided into short chapters, 46 chapters, they can sort of pick and choose, at least at the beginning, the areas that speak to them most. But I think that if they ultimately know that there's a resource that they could turn to for a quick reference or for more in-depth understanding and I wouldn't say conversation, but contemplation, then in general they're going to find that they have something at their side that can support them through that process. And if you just know that it's there, that's also important. Because sometimes you get so stuck in the trees, you fail to see the forest, and you lose sight of what can I be looking at, what could I be referencing, what could I be using in the moment that's going to help me make a better decision. It's going to help me ultimately lead my school in a more effective way.
Right. So this would be great as kind of an ongoing reference that people could always look back to.
Yeah. And even though I market it as a book for new leaders, and that's really, the goal, most of it, I would say probably in excess of 90% of the book has absolute relevance for anyone, regardless of how far along they are in their leadership process. And what was interesting is that as I shared manuscripts with colleagues and people that I wanted to get their feedback and ultimately their testimonials, that was a refrain that I heard again and again. These are people who are leadership experts. They've been in the leadership field for many years, and they all felt to a man that it had certainly a particular focus towards new leaders, but absolute universal application to people anywhere along their leadership journey.
You've had a chance to be in education for a while now, and you've seen, I'm sure, a lot of changes. And so I'm curious to know, since obviously you deal with leadership kind of on a daily basis, have you noticed any changes as far as what makes a leader effective, or is it kind of a universal thing that's kind of consistently always the same?
There's always a change in nuance, but and what it is that school leaders need to know and need to be somewhat proficient with certainly has changed. But I think the leadership, the main changes relates to style. I think people are looking for a greater degree of inclusion. They want their voices to be heard. The top-down form of hierarchical leadership of yesteryear is no longer a sustainable and successful model. And so I think it's really important for anyone going into leadership is to be a great listener, find ways by which to communicate, to get people's input, and to demonstrate that they are willing to incorporate that feedback that they're receiving in a way that helps people be part of whatever change, whatever growth processes the school is embarking on. So that, I think, is perhaps a little bit more of a 21st century leadership focus. But I do believe that the core leadership values remain the same. And I think that it's important for school leaders to walk a fine line, especially as it relates to technology, because on the one hand, as we know, technology has really transformed education in so many ways. On the other hand, I think the human principle of education still remains at the core. And I think that we as leaders need to make sure that we don't get lost in our technology and become so enamored by it so as to lose that emphasis and that focus. And I know that was an issue that I struggled with, especially because it happens to be that my predecessor was very low tech. And so I think that it took a while for some folks to get used to a new style. And I think that even though I was using technology to get closer to people, to be more present, to be more responsive and whatnot, at the same time, I think people found the fact that I was on my phone as often as I was, even in context when they wouldn't expect it, to ultimately demonstrate a lack of connection. And so you just need to know, where is it appropriate, where is it beneficial to use your technology, to use other more contemporary and modern tools, and where do you still need to go old-fashioned, old school?
I could see benefit for leaders like myself who've kind of been in leadership for a while, looking at this book just to see leadership kind of through a new set of eyes instead of kind of the way that I've always, the way that I'm always used to seeing leadership. I could see the value in that. Yeah, I think there's a reason as to why leadership is such a popular topic. If it was the kind of thing that you could write the manual, follow the steps, and become a great leader, then I think we'd all know what that manual is, and we'd follow it and we'd be done. But the fact that it continues to produce so many books and other products is an indication to me that it's a never-ending conversation. And I think that because applications and scenarios change, ultimately folks are looking for contemporary applications. They want to know how is it relevant to them in their specific setting, and what can they do depending on what stage of their journey they find themselves to position themselves best for success. Right. So I want to talk about your personal journey. A lot of the listeners in this podcast are kind of at a place where they're either considering going into a leadership position, or they actually are kind of in that leadership position as a school administrator or school leader in some capacity at this point. And I'm curious to know, so you kind of were first interested in law, and then you took the path of education. What was your first position once you actually had the credentials you needed in order to teach?
First teaching position or administrative position?
Well, first teaching position.
Teaching?
Right.
I taught in an independent high school in Chicago. I was living in the community for a short while. My wife is from Chicago. We had married soon prior to that. And a family friend who was also a dean of a local high school needed a teacher, and he knew of me and felt that I would be an appropriate person for that particular position. And I began there and never looked back.
And then, what was the point at which you first started thinking about going into school leadership? Was there kind of a story behind that?
No, I don't know if I'd say that there was a story, but I felt all along that would be a natural progression for me. I felt that it would provide me with the type of salary as well as opportunity to make education a more sustainable enterprise for myself. And so there was an opportunity about after 3 years, I would say, of teaching in the classroom. We're a congregational school. These were kids who attended public school but wanted to have some type of, let's call it religious education as well. There was a school that provided that supplementary Sunday mornings and a couple times during the week after school. And when that position opened up, I interviewed for it and was hired. And so I had this teaching position, throughout the day, Monday through Friday, and then evenings and Sundays I would lead this other program. And that eventually led to me taking on a more robust administrative position a few years after that, and then that led to the head of school position.
And then how long were you head of school there?
I was I was a full-time head of school for 3 years.
Okay. So what would you say were some of the most difficult, like were some of the biggest challenges that you encountered, I guess, in your first couple of years as the head of school there?
I think there were quite a few, and this was a school undergoing some interesting transition, both in terms of the outgoing head of school and also the direction that the school wanted to move in. But I think the main issue for me was managing a change process, dealing with an expectation. I had a predecessor who was definitely in his retirement years before he actually retired. I think he was around 70 years old at the time. High energy, wonderful, very enthusiastic, a lot of very positive attributes. And so following him was a challenge in and of itself. It certainly didn't make it easier that his wife was passed away from a terminal illness just before I took over. And so there was a lot of raw emotion going on at that particular time as well. But I think what was happening is that the school board and other parents and community members had been pushing for certain changes within faculty, changes in terms of advancing the academic program in the last few years prior to this man's retirement. And as you can imagine, as somebody's halfway out the door, those type of changes usually don't move forward in any concrete type of way. So I came in with a clear set of marching orders, at least in my mind, about what I needed to be doing in order to help the school advance. And those were the questions that were presented to me by the search committee and by the board and others during the interview process. And so as I moved into the school and was alerted to a variety of issues that had to be addressed, I began through the process of addressing them. But I didn't spend enough time in retrospect, building the equity and the trust amongst the faculty in particular. And so I became I guess you would say, framed as a change agent, and perhaps even a ruthless one, in the sense that, some people felt that there wasn't enough of that emotional connectivity and sensitivity and whatnot. So one thing that I learned right off the bat is that, yes, you have to be able to move change along, especially if you're dealing with a school that has had, a certain degree of lack of movement or perhaps even negativity and whatnot. But you have to be able to find a way to do it where you're bringing people along for the journey, and that they feel that you're with them in that process, and concurrently setting reasonable expectations for the people who hired you, so that they're not concerned that you're not advancing the changes that you said you were going to advance, but you're just doing so in a way that everybody can support it and get behind it.
How do you do that in a sincere and genuine way? Because I know sometimes when you get in somewhere, you kind of, it's easy to see what's wrong with the situation, right? And for you to put your fix-it gloves on, you're just dig in and want to start making lots of changes and just try to help get it to where you see that it can be. But how do you, because obviously it's super important for you to have those relationships, how do you do that in a genuine, sincere way?
So to that point, I think the trust building is really critical. I think that where people feel like you're taking an active interest in them and what they have to say, that goes a long way. And being a great listener is the first piece, I think, in that process. And actually, I have a video coming out tomorrow that I'm going to be releasing about 7 tips associated with great listening, because if a person feels that they're being listened to, they also start to trust that other person. They start to feel like that person's with them. And once you build that trust, then everything really is supported by that. There's a visual that I've used in a number of my leadership trainings that I got from John Maxwell, that talks about the idea of the role of trusting the leader, or getting behind the leader, so that even if you don't love the idea, you're going to get behind the leader, because you'll just find another idea. But if the idea is a great idea, you support the idea, but you don't support the leader, at the end of the day, what's going to happen is you're going to still want to get another leader. And so that the leadership relationship is really so important, and building that trust is critical. Once you have that, you can get people to get behind a change effort, get behind any initiative that you have, whether it's establishing corporate or organizational values, all these kinds of things. It happens in a much more robust balanced and aligned way when there's that sense of trust and that sense of support. And by listening, by communicating, by getting people's input, and by letting them feel that they are valued within the organization, you can much more rapidly achieve those goals.
Yeah. Boy, that's great advice. Well, so I guess one of the questions I have, so you were in there as a head of school for how long did you say?
3 years.
3 years. And then from there, what was your path from there?
So that was an interesting time of transition, because there was a part of me that wanted to remain in school leadership, but there was a part of me that I felt like I really needed to pursue this other path. I felt that I had done a lot of professional development training. Even while I was holding these other positions, I had worked with and mentored and coached others, and I felt that many people get into educational consulting and similar work at a much more advanced stage in their careers. You know, they've been in school leadership or other capacities for 10, 20 years, and then they decide for whatever the reason that they wanted to get into that. But I felt that I could make a contribution much sooner, and I didn't want to wait till much later in my life to see if it would be something that I could succeed at. So I jumped into it at an earlier point, and actually did so by relocating, and now I live up in the New York City, greater New York City area, because I felt that this was a market that really could support my initiatives that much more. And so it was an interesting time of transition for me, changing fields, changing communities, really starting from the ground up, which was not easy at all, as you can imagine. But at the same time, I really had this dream and this vision that I could do it, and never look back. You know, I'm not saying every day is as rewarding as the next, and there are highs and lows as whenever you go out on your own and you engage in a consulting practice. But having had the opportunity to meet people, to travel, to engage, and to do so on a much broader scale, and to really own everything that I do, not because I'm trying to, in any way discourage folks who are in schools. I think that that's an incredibly powerful thing, and that really we need great people in schools. We need great teachers. We need great principals. Just for myself, I felt that it was an opportunity to go a little bit broader, and I felt like this was a pathway that I wanted to pursue, and thankfully I've been very blessed to be able to do so, and to do so with a lot of support and to meet my financial goals as well.
Well, so what would you say have been some of the benefits? I mean, what kind of services, I guess, do you offer there at Impactful Coaching?
So I provide executive coaching services. My main focus is on leadership. So I work with principals and their teams. I provide consultations to schools. I do a variety of various planning procedures and processes with them in order to help them be strategic moving forward. I also do a lot of trainings and seminars on a pedagogic as well as leadership topics. So I can go into a school and do everything from observing teachers, coaching them, providing them with support, working with principals, helping them understand their challenges, helping them map out plans for success, and then hold them accountable to that, because that's really critical. Principals are extremely busy people, and they need somebody to help them establish goals, and also to provide the accountability so that they follow through with those goals. At the same time, I provide trainings that help leadership teams as well as people in the classroom really optimize and provide the very best that they can for their constituents.
Yeah, so what would you say is maybe a story of one of the biggest impacts that you've had a chance to make through your consulting practice?
I get feedback. I don't know if there's a single story specifically, but I get feedback all the time, notes and verbal feedback from folks who, are implementing various ideas, and the way that something that I shared with them really resonated. I talk about, for example, teacher leadership, which I think is an area that oftentimes is not appreciated. We often think of leaders and leadership as clearly defined and based off of a title, whether that be principal or something similar. But the reality is that everybody has the opportunity opportunity to be a leader. And teachers are leaders for themselves, for their peers, for their supervisors, as well, of course, for their students. And so having the opportunity to get messages like that out there, helping empower people, giving them, other perspectives on what they can be doing and how they can be growing both personally and professionally, that gives me the greatest sense of satisfaction. And of course, now that I have this book coming out, I feel like that's a whole different way by which I'll be able to reach people, and I'm really excited about how that is going to impact people in their own journeys.
Well, so I have one more question before we jump into the rapid fire questions. So, we were talking before the show, before we actually started recording. So you have 6 children ranging in age from 18 to 4. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. And you've got 2 master's degrees, a doctorate, and you've written a book, which kind of made me feel a little bit like a slacker. So, how do you do that? Like, how do you juggle, and in all of this, obviously this is while you were busy as a school leader and now as a owner and leader of a company. How do you manage your time effectively so that you are fully present and effective as a dad, as a husband, as a, employer, as a leader? How do you juggle it all?
That's a great question. I wish I could say that I would be the one who can give a clinic on that question. But in general, I think a lot of it has to do with surrounding yourself with great people and having a clear sense of what you're trying to accomplish. If my wife, for example, wasn't as understanding as she is in terms of giving me the time that I need to be at my computer, to engage with clients, to do the various things that I need to do, and she, by the way, holds down a full-time job as well. Thankfully, hers is a remote position, which allows her to work from home. But either way, that level of support is absolutely critical. And my kids are now a little bit older, except for the youngest one, who's around more, but most of them are in school for most of the day. So when I come home, it's dinner time. We have an opportunity to sit down to recap the day and catch up. We try to keep it very low technology, no phones at the table, sort of really being present for one another. And then there are other various times throughout the day where we're interacting, but at the same time, obviously, I need to spend a lot of time doing my work. Balancing that with the education wasn't easy, but one of the beauties of doing what I do professionally is that I can really set my own schedule. And since I do some more intensive work during certain parts of the day and I have more flexibility during other parts of the day, and because a lot of my work in education allows me, more time in the summers, so that gave me the freedom to work on my dissertation, that gave me the freedom to do more of my writing and some of the other things that I do. And so, it's just a matter of knowing what you're trying to accomplish, having your big picture sense of where you're going to fit everything in, sometimes on a daily schedule, sometimes more monthly or even annually, and then plotting it all out and holding yourself accountable to getting that done. I don't think that there's any magic formula here. I think the main thing is you need to know what you want, what are the steps you need to take in order to get there, and how are you going to map out your day and your week, etc., in order to ensure that you do that. So, for example, if you have people who are listening to this podcast who are presently in the classroom and have aspirations for school leadership, then what are the things that you should be doing today that are going to position you ultimately to be viewed as a viable candidate for a leadership position? What are the things you could be taking on? What is the learning you could be doing? What is perhaps the writing and other things that you could be involved with that will sort of separate you from the rest of the crowd and give you the leverage and give you the positioning that you need in order to be successful? And if you see everything in sort of like a long-term, this is the way I've looked at it, a long-term, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. There may be people who are going to get there a little bit quicker than you, but the quality of how you get there and ultimately what you bring to the table when you get there, I think is going to hold you really in good stead as you move forward with your process.
Play the long game. Yeah, that's hard to remember when you see people who have that quick initial success and maybe they even cut some corners, it seems like, in your mind, or it seems as though they maybe cut some corners to get there. And for you to just kind of keep that big picture perspective sometimes is a challenge.
Without question. It can be very challenging. And, whether it's they cut corners or they just got lucky, sometimes, I just wrote about this not that long ago. sometimes it just seems that people are more fortunate, in terms of being in the right organization at the right time, or having the financial backing that maybe you didn't have, or certain other things or maybe they got clear on what they were trying to do professionally earlier than you did. There are a lot of different ways that people can get discouraged and say, oh, if I only had this, if I only had that, if this would have worked out for me sooner, et cetera, and we kind of make these excuses for ourselves. But if you listen to any of the folks who are, very successful in the area of inspiration and personal management and change and these kinds of things, people like the Tony Robbins of the world or others, you'll hear a consistent message that, anyone who goes ahead and sort of falls back on those excuses gets nowhere fast. And so we need to really think about the here and now, live in the present. Think about not what I could have done, 5 years ago had I been thinking about this sooner, but where I am today. What do I need to do today? What do I need to do to move forward today? And what are the actions that I take, not just to think about it, but really to chart a step of clear actions that you can do that are within range of your ability, and also something that you could properly plan for. And if you go ahead and you get your clarity, you get your strategy, you get all that aligned, but you really then take clear action and you don't delay and sit on your hands and wait for the perfect opportunity, then you start to build momentum. And once you have that, then the sky's the limit.
Boy, that's great advice. I love it. So I'm going to jump into some rapid fire questions if you're ready for those.
Sure, go ahead.
First off, what's the best leadership advice you've ever received?
I've received a lot over the years, and I don't know necessarily which one is the best, but I'll tell you an answer that doesn't really answer the question directly, but I think it'll circle back. When I was a high school senior, I was given the opportunity to provide kosher supervision at a Manhattan restaurant on Saturday nights. My friend's father owned a certifying agency, and so I had the opportunity. I get down to this restaurant, I'm checking out the place, and I thought that my job was just sort of like to be in and out of the kitchen and kind of like make sure that everything was in order. And somebody says to me, one of the waiters says to me that I've got a phone call, and I pick up the phone, and there's a woman on the line, and she says, "Hi, is this the manager?" Now, mind you, when I was given the job, I had no idea that there was any managerial responsibility whatsoever. And I say, kind of like a little bit off guard there. I say, "Please hold." I go back to the waiter. I said, "She's asking for the manager. Why'd you give the phone to me?" And he said, "Because everybody who does this, kosher supervision also doubles as the manager." So I get back on the phone, and she said, "Are you sure that you're the manager?" And I had this, this kind of like aha moment that, you get into any leadership position, you really need to know what you're getting into. You really need to be clear on the job, and you need to make sure that everybody around you is clear as well. Because if you have that clarity, if everybody understands what you're trying to accomplish, everyone will get behind you better, because there's no way you'll be able to achieve everything. No school is perfect, no organization is perfect, no leader is perfect. And you could forever be distracted and moving in different directions and have people who are concerned about your performance because in their mind you should be working on X, while in your case you're focusing on Y. So the more that you can get that alignment, the more you can get people your own clarity first, and working with others to achieve that clarity as well, whether it's with a board subcommittee or others who are supporting you, and get everybody behind it so they understand that you're going to focus your attention on these core elements first or whenever, so that you can advance those things. That's going to really help everybody. So I think that it's critical, and I talk about this in the book. How do you get that clarity, and how do you communicate it, and how do you stay focused on it? How do you make sure that your assessments are focused on it as well, so that when it comes time for people to give you that annual review, and really it should be happening much more often, that you're getting feedback that's consistent to the goals that you set, and not sort of random things coming out of left field that you really aren't in a position to respond to, or at least to get the type of feedback and grade, if you will, or evaluation that you should be getting because you've been putting your attention elsewhere.
What would you say is your biggest strength as a school leader? Or was your biggest strength as a school leader?
I think getting clarity about what needed to happen, trying to really cut through the weeds and figure out what were the strengths and what were the challenges within the organization. But at the same time, to try to have the common sense to get behind existing momentum. So for example, in my third year in school leadership, actually the end of my second year, I had been participating in a leadership in a principal's practicum fellowship, program with other school leaders, and one of the programs that we had learned about and had become excited to implement was called PBIS, which is a positive behaviors program that's values based that many schools all throughout the country are using. And it so happened to be that that particular time, a number of our teachers had come to me and expressed concerns about student behavior and various issues associated with that. So I said it was a perfect confluence between the learning and the things that I wanted to advance, an opportunity to move change along in a way that already had existing, buy-in and support, and to do so in a way that would really make a lot of people, I think, happy and feeling like we're really growing as an organization, as a school. So I think that leaders would do well by identifying opportunities. Sometimes they have to create them. Sometimes they have to alert people to the need. But in many cases, it's just really more a matter of figuring out where they can have early wins and develop elements of success that builds the momentum that gets people behind them. Mm.
That's great. Yeah, I have come to appreciate, you were talking earlier just about how to kind of overcome some of that discouragement when you see people succeeding more quickly than you or just getting lucky. And one of the follow-up questions I had for that was just, how do you overcome some of that discouragement? And it seems like just from a lot of the things that you've said, just building that momentum, like just getting some early, maybe easy successes to build that momentum is one of the keys to that.
Yeah. Yeah, that really is important. And again, when you get people behind you, there's so much more that can be done. And I think leaders fall into a trap all the time, thinking that they need to know everything and that they need to be able to do everything. And some of the greatest leaders, whether it's people like Charles Schwab or Henry Ford or others who did not necessarily have a robust education in all areas, were able to utilize delegation and utilize the resources of people around them, people who Napoleon Hill might call the mastermind, that they surround themselves with. They figure out ways by which to take advantage of other people's knowledge and talent in order to be able to move things forward. Mm. And so I think that if leaders were less focused, and actually I have a webinar series that I'm going to be focusing on this concept as well. And one of the things when I sent out a survey about this that I got feedback about consistently was the idea that too many leaders think they need to know everything and they need to do everything. And the more that they can figure out how they can serve others, how they can set a direction but give people the opportunity to work on it without them mixing in too much in the process. And that really is the fine art of delegation. If they're able to do that, then they can lead in a far more effective way and optimize people's talent and get a lot more done.
Mm. Yeah, and that's hard, right? Because one of the things that helps you get into that leadership position is kind of you and your ability to take charge and I guess, prove yourself. And so then when you actually get into that leadership position, learning to let go is sometimes really challenging.
Oh, without question. I call it the shift from me to we. And like you said, everyone who's moving up the proverbial food chain wants to be able to separate themselves in the crowd. They want to be able to show how they're different and how they're deserving of taking the next step. And now they've got to retrain themselves. And really this is, by the way, I think a mindset from our earliest days. Because as much as schools in the 21st century have been more focused, on collaboration and things like that, at the end of the day, we still have our own grades. And we have to be personally accountable for our performance. So how do we get leaders to think more broadly? How do we get leaders to, take a we-oriented position? And that's not an easy thing to do. So I think that really leaders do have to find a way to sort of circle back and figure that out. And that's what I think organizations and people being led in organizations are looking for.
Well, so I obviously your new book that's coming out, Becoming the New Boss, is a great book that everyone who's listening should definitely check out. And I'm actually excited to check it out myself whenever it comes out in mid-July. Aside from that, though, what maybe one or two books have made a big impact on you?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Stephen Covey and Dale Carnegie and those classics that deal with how to win friends and influence people, as well as the 7 habits of highly successful people. Because I think that, especially in Covey's case, where you start to think about others and think win-win and put others' perspectives in front of your own, you start to see things differently, and you start to learn how to bring together your talents, to work with and ultimately to support others. So I think you certainly can't go wrong with either of those. There's another one that I've read more recently that I found a lot of value in. I'm actually looking for it at the moment. I know that it relates to leadership training from a couple of Marines. 1 second, I have it right over here. It's called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And I found that to be very valuable as well. These were 2 Navy SEALs who had gone into Iraq during the heart of, in the middle of the recent excursions and whatnot, and had gone in there and really tried to settle some of the most difficult areas, including Ramadi. And they talk about the challenges and the importance of working within the organization and building proper communication, making sure that you have solid feedback along the ranks and things like that. And even though their context is military, I think the applications are universal. So that's another book. It's a New York Times bestseller and something that I enjoyed very much reading. But the reality is I like to read as much as I can, and I think that that's something, especially in today's day and age with technology, that we have a really hard time focusing on. Reading is not as popular perhaps as it used to be. And in fact, what I do now is I try to grab good quality books, such as Think and Grow Rich, which I've been listening to recently, and I get it on Audible. And so now whenever I'm driving or other times that I'm just able to listen but not read, I'll pop that on and I'll listen to that. And this way, it gives me an opportunity to continually be thinking about and growing from various ideas.
Right, and that's great too, because you can actually download it on your device. I've got Audible that I've had for a while, and you can download it, and then if you happen to not have, you can't stream it, don't have any coverage, you can listen to it. Those times when you're maybe flying or something, and the Wi-Fi is not working or whatever it is.
Yeah. But I think that we have to really manufacture opportunities for learning. So my family jokes about it all the time. But when I get on the exercise bike, as part, when I'm doing push-ups and sit-ups, it doesn't really lend itself as much. But when I'm on the bike, I'm listening to inspirational talks. I'm listening to podcasts, whatever it might be, people who I feel could add value to my practice. And instead of having it just exercise time, which is valuable in and of itself, I try to double the benefit. And even if it may detract a little bit from my adrenaline rush and my motivation in terms of the workout, as far as the overall benefit, I think it's a much more strategic way to go. So if you can plant yourself in front of a computer, or you can just pop in your earphones and put on something on YouTube or whatever it might be, you're going to gain a lot from other things that you typically have to walk the dog anyway. You got to, do some household chores anyway. You pop something in that's actually rewarding and has educational and intellectual value. It's going to help. It all adds up.
Yeah, that's a great point. Especially with all the technology there is, and you can listen, you can read. There's so many opportunities you have like that. So instead of, jumping in front of or on the elliptical or treadmill or whatever it is, and just listening to music or watching TV, especially as a leader, if you're growing, you are going to be able to serve people much better than if you're not learning and growing at all.
Yeah, you have to be. And especially in today's day and age with so much change, I think it's really important for us to remember that whatever we learned when we learned it back in school, however long ago that was for people, change is just part and parcel of the process, and you can't rely upon that previous learning in order to to be fully current with what you need to know.
Right. Well, so what advice would you have for a school administrator as far as working with the students that they serve?
I think it's really important for administrators to get involved with their students. Some people like to teach, some people don't. I've done both, and I get both, and I am not here to weigh in necessarily on that. I think it depends on a lot of variables and factors, but I think it is important to get to know the kids, try to be a be a presence in their life, be present in the hallways, be present in classrooms, try to have opportunities for individual conversation. Sometimes I used to write the school newsletter, and I would interview students as part of that, thoughts about what happened in school that was great or this or that. And instead of earmarking it or delegating that to somebody else, I wanted to do it myself because it gave me yet another opportunity to connect with them. And if we had reward ceremonies or other ways by which to, call home and share some good tidings about student performance, I wanted as much as I could to be part of that process because I felt it built a lot of goodwill between myself, the children, their families, and everything at the end of the day is all about relationships. If your relationships are strong, even when you mess up, people will look the other way, they'll cover for you, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But when your relationships are weak, you won't get that coverage, and things could go sideways quickly. So I think that any opportunity you can find to build and deepen those relationships, and ultimately that's what it's all about. You're not there just to run an organization. You're not just there to push kids through a system. You're there to inspire and make a difference. I would think anybody in education is ultimately driven by mission. They're certainly not driven by profits. And so whatever you can do to stay aligned with that, that's going to give you the emotional fodder and energy necessary to keep you going, especially during the rough times.
Well, so kind of along those lines, what one piece of advice would you have for a school administrator as far as working with the teachers?
So I think some of what we talked about before, really opening up the door at the beginning, getting them aligned, helping them to see where you're coming from, because I think sometimes teachers don't really appreciate the responsibility that a principal has. So giving them that perspective, but at the same time helping them to understand that you see your role first and foremost as supporting them. They're on the front lines, they're the ones who make the difference, they're the ones engaging with the kids first and foremost, and your job more than anything else is to support them.
Well, so last question. If you had a time machine and you could jump in it and go back to the point in time when you first made the decision to go into school leadership, what advice would you go back and give to that younger version of yourself?
What I talked about before, the idea of being a better listener, taking more time before moving forward with change, being not I guess, it's interesting when they talk about rookies who come into professional sports, for example, they often talk about the game slowing down for them towards the end of the season or maybe in the second year. Everything, they've had an opportunity to do a walkthrough and learn the terminology and learn the formations and the plays and all these various things. And in so doing, they become just more comfortable with it. And I feel like if I would have, in retrospect, been able to go back and do it again, I would have slowed things down, built more trust, built more credibility and equity, so that when it was time, when I felt it was a more viable time for me to move forward with the various agenda items, I would have had more, square support behind me that could have helped move things forward more quickly without having to engage in any type of damage control.
Yeah, that's tough because, when you're young and new to a position, you're super excited. You just want to, like we were talking about earlier, you want to jump in there and make a bunch of changes. And I have, as I've gotten older, as I'm sure you have, I've learned the value of patience. And it's been a hard lesson.
It is. But patience, again, is something that everybody needs to buy into. Because, like I said, in many cases, people don't realize the difficulty of going into a new leadership position and the time that it takes for people to get their feet established underneath them. And they're looking for immediacy. They're looking for quick change. They're looking for immediate impact. And you may not have the benefit of really taking your time. But I think the more that you can work with people to get aligned and get those expectations in order, it's ultimately going to help you tremendously. And then you can take the long-term view about how are you going to make everything move forward in the right way and in the time that everybody can find to be reasonable and acceptable.
Well, so finally, if one of our listeners wants to reach out to you after the show, what would be the best way to connect with you?
They can reach out. I actually have two websites that they could visit. My core website is impactfulcoaching.com, and my book website is becomingthenewboss.com. They can reach me. They can give me a call anytime at 212-470-6139, or reach out to me via email. either at nhoff@impactfulcoaching.com or author@becomingthenewboss.com. They could also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm active on all those social media platforms, Google Plus as well. I love to engage with others. I love to share ideas, have those great conversations. They could also check out my YouTube channel, where they could see a lot of videos that I've posted regarding leadership and many of the trainings that I've done.
Awesome. EduLeaders, this has been a great interview today. For the show notes of today's show and other resources, including all of the things that Naphtali just mentioned, where to find him and his websites, visit educatorslead.com and type the word Naphtali, Naphtali, into the search tool to find his show notes. Naphtali, thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
It's my pleasure, Jay. I think it's been just an incredible experience for me to have this conversation. It never gets old. That's the truth. It never gets old. There's always something additional that I think about and that I'm able to share, as I have these conversations. And more importantly, if there's anything that I was able to contribute to people's reflection about their own work and ideas that they have in terms of planning for the future, it's been an honor for me to make that contribution.
Awesome. And that wraps up another episode of Educators Lead. This podcast is brought to you by Mometrics, the #1 test preparation company. Mometrics offers study materials for over 1,800 different exams, including the SAT, ACT, GED, end-of-course exams, state standard exams like the STAR, teacher certification exams, advanced placement, CLEP, ASVAB, GRE, and so many more. Mometrics takes the mountains of information students could be tested over for any given exam and boils it all down to just the fluff-free golden nuggets of information that are most likely to be on the exam. They couple that with some great study tips and test-taking strategies to help students maximize their test scores. With their interactive tutorial videos and a layout that makes lesson planning easy, Mometrics study guides, flashcards, and practice questions are a great fit for individual or classroom use. To learn more about our products and our vault of hundreds of free tutorial videos, please visit educatorslead.com/test prep. That's educatorslead.com/test prep. EduLeaders, thank you for joining us on Educators Lead. Visit us at educatorslead.com for everything we talked about today, free resources, and much, much more.